Thank you. All right, here we go. So today we're going to revisit something that we talked about for the major portion of the lecture earlier in the semester, and that we've talked about from time to time in the context of other lectures as well, and that is business plans and business planning. What is this all about, and why are we doing it? So we'll begin with a reading from the book of Gilbert, in which the pointy-headed boss says, "Sales are dropping like a rock. Our plan is to invent some sort of doohickey that everyone wants to buy." And then the pointy-haired boss says, "The visionary leadership work is done. How long will your part take?" So sort of the cynical engineer's view about what business planning is all about. And indeed, as we've acknowledged from time to time, there is a view about business planning that it gets in the way of doing the real work. People become obsessed with doing planning, and that time could better be spent actually doing stuff, actually making the business go. So I'd like to just kind of review why we're doing a business plan in here and what you can hope to get out of having a business plan. So there's three reasons, and I've made them all start with F, but they're probably not the F words that you think, although you may say those to yourself while you're doing your business plan. The first one is funding. Realistically, in order to get funding from any professional organization, whether it's a bank or a venture capitalist or a angel investment group, you're going to need to have a business plan. My analogy is you need a business plan to get funding in the same way that you need a CV to get a job. So when you apply for a job, one of the things the prospective employer always asks for is a CV. Now, you're never going to get hired on the basis of that CV alone. What you're trying to do with the CV is get an interview. And you hope on the basis of the interview, you'll eventually get a job. And it's the same thing with the business plan. You're never going to get money on the basis of the business plan alone, but what you're trying to do is get a meeting. And at that meeting, and the next meeting, and the next meeting, hopefully at the end of it, you will get money. Now there are, of course, people who will very proudly tell you that they've never had to apply for a job in their lives. And in fact, they don't even have a CV. And why is it that they've never had to apply for a job? Well, one reason might be that they're unemployed. But two other more substantive reasons are they're extremely good at something. They're a football player or an actor or a Nobel Prize winning scientist or something who doesn't need to worry about applying for a job. Indeed, their problem is turning down all the offers that they get. So that's one group of people. Another group of people, of course, and we've talked about them quite a bit, are people who don't have to apply for a job because they've started their own company. And they work there. They don't apply to themselves for a job. They don't write a CV and then look at it like that famous scene from The Castle where the lawyer dictates notes into a tape recorder and then turns around, sits at the typewriter and listens to the dictation and types them up. People, of course, don't do that. So there are other groups of people who will quite proudly say, I never have had to apply for a job, I don't have a CV. Similarly, there are people who will say, look, I've never had to ask for money, so I don't have a business plan. And by analogy, there are people who are so famous and have been so successful that people press money on them. Their problem, just like the person who has to turn down all the job offers, their problem is to turn away investors. Now, it sounds like kind of a high-class problem to have, and in a way it certainly is. But there are people who, after they've been successful 2 or 3 times, not once, because once is luck, but after they've been as successful as an entrepreneur 2 or 3 or 4 times, the 5th time they really don't need to write a business plan. They just need to, for this purpose. They don't need to write a business plan for this purpose. I'll say later I think they should have a plan anyway. But for the purpose of getting funding, really they can do it on the telephone because they have a great track record. And at the other end of the scale, analogous to the people who don't need a CV because they've worked for themselves all their lives, there are people, and there are many people, who start up their business on their own money and never take money from anybody else. We talked about this early in the course when we were talking about entrepreneurs and manager-owned businesses. And we said that actually the majority of those businesses never take money from anybody except the founder. Why is that? Well, remember that most of those businesses are run by people who've been doing something for someone. They've been doing gardening, they've been writing patent applications, they've been doing consulting, they've been drawing architectural plans, whatever they've been doing, and they decide to stop working for someone else and keep practicing their trade, if you will, for themselves. And they do that for customers who are very much like the customers they used to have. In fact, they may be the same customers, and they try to take those customers away with them. They don't need much of an investment to get started. They can easily cover what they need in the way of tools, and they may work out of their home. They don't need an office, and so on. And they bring in cash right away. That's very important. They bring in cash right away. And so with a little bit of investment, they can basically bootstrap themselves from a beginning position into a viable business. So we acknowledge those two exceptions. Most of us, however, are neither so famous that people press money on us, nor are we content with a small, maybe one employee or no employee, bootstrapped business. We've looked at examples in here, and we will look at a few more today, of organizations, especially IT-based organizations, that are leveraged. They start with an idea and they grow, and in order to grow they need money. More than the founder has. More than the founder's family, friends, schools, and the other groups that we talked about. They have to go somewhere for funding. So, yes, there are exceptions, just as there are exceptions to the rule of having a CV to get a job, but they're few, and most of us aren't Mark Zuckerberg, most of us aren't going to found Facebook. Most of us are going to have to go to somewhere else if we want money to grow our businesses, and to do that we need a plan. Now, in a way, this is a symbolic act. The same way having a CV is a symbolic act. Or think of yourself going to a job interview. You get dressed up, right? Why do you get dressed up? It has nothing whatsoever to do with your ability to do the job, unless you're auditioning to be a model or something like that. But otherwise, clothes don't have anything to do with it. You're symbolically, you're saying to the employer, I know this is a serious place, and I'm a serious person. And I'm going to live at least a little bit by the rules by showing up in my different clothes. It's the same way with having a business plan. You're saying to the funder, look, this may be totally symbolic. And after today, after I get the money, you may never look at the plan again. But I understand that I've got to have one. So there's this kind of rule. Now, just look at a couple of examples of organizations in Melbourne in terms of what their expectation is. So here's a venture capital company called GBS Ventures. So GBS Ventures is probably the largest surviving Australian venture capital firm. We've said before that venture capital in Australia is kind of an endangered species. There's a question about whether we will have much of an industry 5 years from now. But of the ones that are still there, GBS is probably the largest. And what do they say on their website? The same thing that everyone says. If you have a new investment opportunity for us to consider, please contact us with the following information about the opportunity. And then they list unique technology and relevant documentation, including patents and licenses, management team with relevant experience and qualifications, target market, size of the market, competitors and potential customers, and business model. In other words, they say, send us a business plan. They don't call it a business plan because they don't want any confusion about what that term means. But they list almost exactly what we're saying you have to have in a business plan. So venture capital, absolutely they want a business plan even if they don't call it a business plan.